Thank you. Oh, this is live. Okay. So I'm going to introduce Maayan, and then we'll get started. Maayan Ziv is an activist, a photographer, and an entrepreneur. From a young age, Maayan challenged norms and worked within her community to increase awareness of disability issues and improve accessibility. Living with muscular dystrophy, Maayan is a passionate and relentless advocate for creating a more accessible world. In 2015, Maayan founded Access Now, a mobile media app that maps accessibility statuses of locations worldwide. She has since been a regular media commentator on topics such as disability, diversity, and inclusion. In 2016, Maayan received the City of Toronto's Access Award, the Startup Canada National Resilient Entrepreneur of the Year Award, and the David C. Onley Leadership and Accessibility Award in recognition of her innovative solutions and commitment to improving the lives of people with disabilities. Maayan also sits on the board of the Toronto Arts Council and the Centre for Independent Living in Toronto. She's earned a bachelor's degree in radio television arts here at Ryerson and a master's degree in digital media also here at Ryerson. So that's Maayan's introduction. So that's great, and so much media activism experience in what we're calling here today, mapping crip spaces, safe crip spaces, which I understand is a new term for you, but I can't wait to hear how you take that up. So I think what we're going to do for our time together is we're going to start by playing a little bit of a media production by Maayan. Do you want to set it up at all, or should we just play it?
Sure. Hi, I'm Maayan. Whoa, that is quite a microphone. It's so weird to hear somebody else say your bio in front of you. But hi, I'm Maayan. We're gonna play a short clip from a CBC radio show that I hosted and produced about a year ago, just to kind of set up discussions. So we thought it'd be fun to just add elements that are besides just me talking a lot. So that's what we're gonna do now.
First floor, going down.
It usually starts with yes, we're completely accessible, but you need to use the side door, and it's never just the side door. It's always some intricate path up 17 elevators, and maybe asking 4 people for directions, and perhaps to get to the place you want to go to.
Walk sign is on for all crossings.
So I knocked on the window, and eventually someone came out who worked there, and they're like, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I need to get in here." I was like, "Well, yeah, come on in." I said, "Well, there's a step right here." "Oh, well, your scooter looks heavy." Just that one step, and I think that one step ticks me off more than an entire staircase, because that one step is everywhere.
I think humor is so important on both sides. It's important for the individual with the disability, because you can't stay in that moment of always, I'm struggling, there's a barrier, you've got to overcome so much.
Please stand clear of the doors.
This is Shifting Space. I'm Maayan Ziv. Imagine this. A world where the doors don't open and stairs lead nowhere. Where you pick up the phone and there's no dial tone. The internet is in a language you don't understand. Nothing works the way you want it to. It's like the environment was built for someone else. 4 million Canadians live with a disability, and this is what it feels like. 25 years ago, I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. I've lived my life from the perspective of a wheelchair, and wherever I go, the first question I ask is, will this space be accessible?
The answer is not always clear, and often I've got to be creative if I want to get to my destination. While others might walk through the front door, I'll find my way up makeshift ramps and on plywood pathways. Muscular dudes will hoist my chair up a flight of stairs. These are the colorful solutions that get me through the door. I've been through alleyways, industrial kitchens, and garbage chutes. I've been backstage and through loading docks, finding those unconventional ways to get places. In the next hour, we'll visit places that are perhaps familiar, but we'll experience them through a new lens. As we delve into different perspectives, are people disabled? Or is it our environment that's disabling us? Coming up, we consider shifting space.
What sign is on for all crossings? What sign is on?
Okay, so that was a bit of a teaser. So lots of those themes are things that we talk about in disability studies and activism all the time, shifting the idea of the problem of disability from the individual to public space. But I think I remember listening to that on Family Day last year, and how your use of radio, documentary, and broadcasting really did open up the activist potential of getting those messages across to everyone, I guess. And it's my understanding that you pitched the show to CBC and they went with it. So again, a really interesting way of sort of bringing these messages beyond the classroom. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was weird. I never created a radio show before I did that. I had this really great opportunity to talk with one of the producers at CBC, and it was just a casual conversation about what I was interested in and thoughts on what I thought that CBC radio needed that I wasn't hearing. And through those conversations, they said, well, why don't you just pitch some ideas on what you would do? So I pitched a couple ideas, one of them being, why don't we just talk to people who experience barriers and also look at different ways that people view accessibility and actually go through places in the city and share that with, mainstream audiences. And so they said, okay, well, here's an hour. Go make something. And I was like, okay. And also it came with kind of a warning that said, if you do this badly, you'll never step foot here again. So no pressure, but it was a lot of fun because what we did was, the point was to bring discussions beyond just physical spaces, although that was a large part of it. In the radio show, we go to the Eaton Center and kind of navigate barriers there. We went to Ripley's Aquarium. We went through the underground path. And we did it with people with varying disabilities so that you could experience, like Mad Pride was a part of it as well. And you could experience online experiences if you couldn't see the web pages that you were flipping through. And so the idea was to bring different perspectives on what access means in Canada, and by the end of the show, to get a bit of an invitation to be part of some kind of movement. So as a journalist, I can't go in with any agenda, but it was just really to kind of create a conversation that could open up people's minds to different perspectives. And my main pitch to them was, if you want to really reflect diversity in Canada, which I think is your job at CBC, well, where are the voices of people with disabilities? Don't tell their stories for them. Just let people talk. And I think that was the main message that really resonated with them, and I think why they were so willing to give me a shot. So if you're interested, you could check it out. It's online. It's about an hour. And we got some really, really, really great feedback from teachers, from people across Canada who just never heard about something like, a wheelchair accessible aquarium where you could drive your chair onto like a moving pathway and just go, So we heard really, really great perspectives, and it turned out quite well. And hopefully we'll do something like that again sometime. Yeah.
And you mentioned it, or someone mentioned it a little bit in the intro, but apart from just talking about structural barriers, you also had these sort of funny anecdotes throughout, dating while disabled. Do you want to talk about the use of humor in that doc?
Oh, sure, yeah. So that's like just something that I enjoy. If I'm gonna do anything, it has to be entertaining to me. And so I'm so used to hearing stories about accessibility or about disability being very serious or often motivated in this very let's raise pitchforks and flags, and we'll advocate for what's right. And I thought, well, wouldn't it just be interesting to just talk about what it's actually like? And there's a lot of humor in navigating a world that has issues. And if you talk to any person with a disability, these stories are very common. Of just the silliness of it all. And we didn't want an hour of like the world sucks, and everything is very not accessible. We wanted to add elements of the joy and the color that often challenges can bring.
And I also think it does well to show that it's a community as well. Like when you're talking to Tim about going through the aquarium, we're sharing sort of common frustrations and experiences, and your friendship sort of comes through in that way. Any questions about the use of radio for that? Yeah.
Were you skeptical going into it at first? Maybe like thinking about like some maybe possible negative feedback you'd get, or?
I definitely felt a lot of responsibility. I felt like if we were going to do a story about accessibility, first of all, this couldn't just be something that focused on physical barriers. It couldn't just be about people who use wheelchairs. I wanted it to be a lot bigger than that. And so I made sure that, the diversity of our subjects, the people who we were interviewing, also came from varying perspectives. And so it wasn't an accident that we kind of brought together a lot of people who could share different perspectives. And I think that added a lot to the piece. Because I think that often what happens is we talk about disability and people just picture, the person who's had a spinal cord injury and sits on a manual wheelchair. Like, that's it. That is what disability means. And there's a real problem with that. So I was nervous because I'd never done this before and felt a lot of responsibility to at least try and be equitable about it. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
How was the CBC radio piece about when you were sort of navigating all the different spaces? How was that presented? I guess just vocally, or?
So the question, if you couldn't hear, was how did you kind of navigate spaces over the radio, right?
Yeah, so you were talking about going through the eating
Mm-hmm.
that kind of.
So we did it. We did live recording. So everywhere that we went, we interviewed our subjects wherever they were, as opposed to bringing them into a controlled studio environment. We wanted to hear the good and the bad, the joy of experiencing access when you often just expect to not have it, and that kind of elated feeling, which you very much hear in Tim when we go through Ripley's aquarium, and just the kind of cluttered frustration that comes with navigating, an underground path when you can't see signs, So we wanted both, and so it was very important to bring the audience over the radio to the spaces that we were actually visiting. Yeah.
And is that, I guess it's still somewhere online?
Oh yeah, so we just played it actually straight off the CBC website.
And there's a resource page at the end of the. I'll send it along. Yeah. Other questions before we move on to other kinds of media? Yeah.
What CBC show was it that you did the?
So it was actually kind of its own holiday special. So it was played during Family Day, and then I think it played again during Easter. So it was just kind of a one-off, 1 hour, and we've talked about doing more of them, and perhaps this becomes Shifting Space the show, which I would love to do, but given guess what you'll learn through the rest of the presentation. I have to kind of spread myself thin over being a radio host and journalist and an app creator and a panel discussion person. And so it will happen, but the question is when and not if. Yeah.
Any others? Okay, yeah. So let's move on to the next kind of media activism that you participate in, which is your website, Access Now. And when you're talking about it, I'll sort of be going through it.
Sure.
But if you could introduce sort of the idea behind it, this idea of, what you mean by pinpointing access, and maybe how everyone can sort of get involved in participating, and why it's important for you that happens, that it's user-led.
Sure, yeah. So I went to Ryerson twice, and after I finished my undergrad, I thought I'd never come back. I was so done with school. And then after about a year and a half, 2 years, I think, of working as a photographer actually in Toronto, I just kind of was frustrated I was doing a lot of the same work and I needed some kind of challenge. I tend to do that. I tend to just go out of my way and find things that are difficult. Anyway. And so I thought, well, what could be new and different that I haven't done yet? And I thought, well, there's this really cool program at Ryerson, Masters of Digital Media. It's a 1-year program. You could build something or create something new, and it was very entrepreneurial. It's a really cool program here, guys. I don't know if anyone's in it. Are you guys any master's students? Not yet. Well, hi. So I entered this program, and within the first week or so, a lot of the discussion in class was about, look for problems in your own life, look for problems around you, and there might be opportunity there to solve these issues in new creative ways using media. And so it was the end of the first week of class, and we were all going to go to grab drinks somewhere and kind of celebrate the new year together of class. And it was we were actually at the Ram and the Rye, and we were let's go somewhere else. Let's go somewhere exciting and new. And I couldn't figure out if the place that everybody decided to go to was going to be accessible. And I was oh, here it is again. Here's this wonderful question that pops up everywhere in my life. Is the place going to be accessible? And that was kind of my aha light bulb moment, which has never really happened in my life before. But it was very much this is it. This is the problem that I need to solve. It was right in front of my face, and I just felt that was it. I needed to do something about it. So I just started. I wasn't a technical, I wasn't a coder, I wasn't a developer, I didn't know how to build an app, but I felt I needed to start. So throughout the year in my master's, I connected with developers, I connected with a lot of profs here, I connected with startup founders of the DMZ, and eventually came to a point by August where we had launched a kind of beta version, which was a website of a map where you could just rate places. You could share information about accessibility, and you could then, in turn, figure out if where you wanted to go was accessible for you. So very much like Yelp or TripAdvisor, or honestly Google Maps, because it is Google Maps. Just share this kind of information. So we launched, and that turned into this crazy new adventure for me, where the next going on almost 2 years come this August, we've been working to crowdsource and share information about pretty much every type of location you can think of in Toronto and in Ontario and Canada and beyond. So we launched our mobile app just this past November, and we're reaching now about 15,000 places in about 30 different countries. And that's been pretty cool. And it's all through user-generated contributions. It's people who get it, or people who are interested, or have heard something on CBC radio or on the media or somewhere and gone, wow, I totally just want to get involved. I don't know what it takes, But I actually, just before coming here, I got this post on Instagram from someone, I think in Saskatchewan, who rented a wheelchair and decided that they just wanted to learn. Like, I just want to learn. And if I can use Access Now and share my experiences, sure. So that was pretty cool. And it's just been really about creating awareness through action, as opposed to creating a PSA that would hopefully educate people to the point where they did something about it. I just was tired of waiting for other people. And so it's very grassroots. It's very much about people just doing as opposed to talking about it. And that's what Access Now is. So if you're excited about that, check it out. You guys can all now share information. Ryerson, I would say, is pretty mapped out, but anywhere you go, if you go somewhere and you go, wow, this place is totally accessible or not accessible, within seconds you'd pin that and be part of the community that is sharing information, so that I can go during inaccessible places, or whatever the case is, yeah.
I wonder if this map is encouraging businesses to become accessible, because it's also a way of advertising businesses, right? Like, we always say that, like, if you make your business accessible, then you'll get more business because more people can come. And I wonder if this app contributes to that. I mean, thinking about the activism beyond mapping it, but promoting accessibility as well.
Yeah, there's a couple components to that. So the first one is just we need to get enough information so that the people who need access can just find it. Like, that was the first step. From doing that, there's so much we can do with this information, with this data, that can provide people with insight on how to create change. So we do, when it comes to business owners, we do a lot of social media outreach, where we'll tag a business on Facebook or on Twitter and share with them a rating that they've received on Access Now. So, for example, last week, there was a rating about a new place called Paramount Foods, which is pretty known in Toronto, but they have a new location on Spadina, and they renovated their entire thing to make it all fancy. And it used to be a place with a ramp, and then they renovated and made a step. And so, actually, I was the one to see this, and I was so furious. So I posted it through the Access Now account and said, hey, Paramount, did you notice that you did this? Took a picture and shared that, and our community was just totally on it. And that's the most exciting part. That's where the activism happens, because it's not enough for one person to say it. We need a lot of people to contribute to that. And it's not really about shaming, Paramount, for example, and saying like, oh, you suck, because that doesn't really create change. But what it does do is create a tension or a space where reaction has to happen. It's not like you can't avoid, thousands of people complaining or sharing information about something that's been unjust. So by doing this, we've received response now from Paramount saying that they've applied for a permit from the City of Toronto to actually change that step. And let's see now if they actually do it.
Great.
Yeah,
So
but
great.
that's just kind of one example of the kinds of small things that we can do. And then as a whole, we were chatting a little bit earlier, like we could use this data to influence policy change overall, And so the excuse of, well, we just don't really know, or often I get, and maybe you have similar experiences, where you go somewhere and you have a politician, get on a stage and it's a conference about inclusion or accessibility or something, and they go, we are the most accessible this or that. And I'm like, well, where did you get that data? Because we're quite sure that that's not the case. And by actually creating a substantial amount of information, we can use that to influence change.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Any questions about the app? Yeah.
Sorry, I got a go soon, but my question was, you're using a Google base map, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you had any kind of response from Google? Google Maps?
We've had early conversations with Google. Recently in the States, someone on their 20% time decided to start allowing people to also contribute. So we're kind of in this space now of let's let's raise enough of a conversation that we can hopefully work together as opposed to just be on our own. And share this, like, we'd like to get to the point where if you opened Google Maps and you knew nothing about Access Now, you could still find that data. And currently that's not the case. Yeah.
Lots of questions. Lots. Oh, and the microphone.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, I think here. And then over here.
Yeah, I just have a more general question. As a Ryerson alumni, how did you find your experience at Ryerson, accessibility-wise? I think that's particularly relevant, seeing as we're sitting in the school right now.
Sure, yeah. So I loved going to Ryerson, and they didn't pay me to say that. I do. I very much, I wanted to go to Ryerson before I went to Ryerson. I knew that this was the school I wanted because it was in downtown, it was kind of like in the urban core, and I could be and go places independently, and that was a large motivation initially. There are some fantastic people that I worked with at the Access Center to talk about things like accommodation kind of in my own classes, or it was mostly about classroom environments, like for example, you know, we'd go to a class and there's a barrier to the entrance, or I'd make a comment, or the desks were bolted to the ground and I actually couldn't sit anywhere in the class. So like there were things like that, especially in the older parts of campus, like Kerr Hall, for example. I spent a lot of time mapping, actually, in my head, the accessible routes, and I had to do that on my own. So if you took 5 minutes or 10 minutes to get to class, I would sometimes take 30 minutes or longer to reroute and figure out how in God's name I'm going to get to this class, like buried in like Eric Palin Hall or whatever it was. I can hear you guys go like, yeah. So it's not always obvious, the accessible routes. And I figured out eventually that there were some ways to do things like get from here all the way over to Yonge without ever going outside if I knew which elevators to take. Those kinds of things really helped. But overall, you know, like, I would say it was pretty good. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi. I drive a power wheelchair, and I am a self-advocate around getting all kinds of places to take that seriously around having accessible bathrooms and elevators, and I definitely hear you about going in a lot of back doors, and I just wondered what kind of systems you use for support around advocacy in Toronto. Like I've used the AODA hotline and Arch Disability Law, but I find like legal tactics sometimes can be like received as bullying by people around change, but the change is so necessary.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like, if you want to speak a bit more about that.
Yeah, that's like the crux of it all. That's the hardest, most challenging part of all of this, is that even with something like the AODA, there just isn't enough enforcement of an actual law in Ontario to make change, right? Where you have to go all the way to filing a human rights complaint to live in a condo building in Toronto. I did that. And, you know, it's not fair. It's not fair that every single individual that faces a barrier should have to go and lobby and go through legal cases or battles just to get equal rights. And I think that is, for me, one of the main reasons that I was desperately looking for an alternative to that. So I didn't want to spend my days in courts or fighting, although that I think is quite necessary, and we do have advocates in the city who are quite passionate about doing work like that. Like if you know of the work of David Lepofsky, for example, he has sued the TTC several times and created change by doing so, but it's exhausting. And so, you know, I definitely think that something like Access Now or Access Now in many ways can help influence that change through a grassroots community way, rather than every individual out for themselves. I thought if we could build a community voice that was large enough and influential enough and strong enough, we've seen other marginalized groups beforehand do similar work, and it's just, you can't ignore it. And so I'm definitely coming from the opposite approach now, as opposed to lobbying and going after legal battles. I wanted to do it by creating enough of a loud voice in the community that says that, like, we're just not going to settle anymore. Yeah.
There were lots of yeah.
I know that there are lots of, I know of other kind of small projects that have been built by different groups, not necessarily about accessibility, but different kind of quote unquote special groups. And Google has always kind of been very upfront about their desire to buy things, buy these kind of entities. So it's kind of on the same vein as the gentleman had asked about whether or not Google has spoken to you. My question is whether or not you would consider selling what you're doing to them in order to kind of ensure that it did get integrated into the Google Maps platform.
It's a question that comes up a lot, and I think, like, from day one when I said, like, let's build a map, let's share data, someone was like, oh, Google will buy it. And I think that opportunity is on the table. I'm not saying that it actually is, but I think for me, I'm an advocate first. I'm not a business person, and it's a weird world that I've been thrown into now, where I make sure, and it's not just me, it's every person on the team, that the choices that we make at Access Now are motivated by the need for further access. So for example, if Google was to come and say, hey, we'd like to buy this, well, then we'd need to guarantee that the data that we've collected is integrated to the point, or that they can amplify the work that we've done so that mainstream audiences across the world can access that, not to kind of own it and then put it on a shelf.
That wasn't where I was trying to go.
Oh, yeah.
It's from the direction that you're speaking of around the more, if you can integrate it into Google's platform already, it does open the door for more people to do what you're doing. That's
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think whatever way that you find this kind of information, if it's doing what you need it to do, then we've done our job. And actually, if Access Now is successful, we'll have run ourselves out of business. Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Just right. Oh, it's okay. I don't need.
We're recording.
Yes, you do.
No.
You do need it.
I'm just wondering if I'm looking at your app and thinking, does it? And I've looked at it before, but I'm just wondering if it in some way aligns with AODA in terms of, or what it aligns with in terms of the pins. So it looks like it's aligning with what types of accessibility, what is accessible about it. But as AODA, and I'm only still learning about it, it's based on IT, it's based on customer service, built environment, and a couple other things I can't remember.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering how it was set up in terms of categories.
Yeah. So I think one of the hardest challenges, one of the largest ones for me anyway, was when we were in the building stages of Access Now, we had to come up with like a system. We had to design a way for people to share information, rate it, categorize it, and initial conversations definitely gravitated towards, why don't we just kind of adopt AODA principles? Because we were focused specifically initially on built environment, and we are still tied to physical locations, and we wanted to create a system that, first of all, wasn't intimidating, that if you didn't know anything about accessibility, you didn't have to read, a massive document in order to get involved. That would defeat the purpose. So it needed to be accessible in terms of how you came across the information, and it needed to scale beyond Ontario. And so with those principles in mind, what we did is, instead of following legal principles tied to specific jurisdictions, we created a more descriptive, personalized approach that would allow people to just share their own perspective. And we defined it as, if you can go there and do what you want and leave with ease, that is accessible. And so that would be too broad. So then we went down a notch after that and said, well, okay, what about it is accessible then? If you're saying it's a thumbs up, if it's green. Does it have an accessible washroom? Does it have Braille at that location? Is it spacious? And we've been adding tags all the time. So it's more of a descriptive method as opposed to kind of prescribing to what's out there already. Yeah. And what you're seeing online actually is the web app, but our mobile app is kind of the route we're going. So
Can I bring it up online?
we'd have to connect a phone and stuff, but anyway, you guys all have phones, so you can check it out.
Other questions about the app, Megan? Oh, just wait for the.
Thank you. Do you see the app changing a lot? Where do you see it going in the next couple years or so? Or what else do you want to integrate, or what do you like that you did? Kind of. There's a lot of questions.
So yeah, it has changed, and I think the first major change came from right after launch. Instead of kind of perfecting it and then getting it out to the world, I threw up something that just was almost embarrassing, but did the job. And so that we could get that feedback from actual people. And initial feedback, we had one accessibility issue in terms of the visibility of our partial accessibility category, for example. The icon wasn't very legible, or the color wasn't really meeting standards. So we did small things like that to actually increase the technical accessibility of our platform, just based on people just trying it and saying, this works, this doesn't work. And then the majority of the feedback was actually around other groups who wanted to use our platform and didn't feel like their perspectives could be documented yet properly. So the first, when we initially launched, we actually only focused on people who experience mobility barriers. So if you use a wheelchair or a walker or a cane, and that was what we specifically focused on. So it was built environment only. And from feedback from other groups, we added other tags that would allow other people to share their own perspective. So we added Braille, we added things about lighting, and we're actually looking now at sound as well. So we added quiet as one, spacious was another one, and these were actually user contributed tags that people kept sharing. So we had for a while a suggestion box. So we had our tags, and it said, do you want to suggest one? And people kept suggesting a couple similar ones, and from that feedback we integrated them directly into the app.
What about gender neutral washrooms?
Yeah, so that's actually come up recently, and something that we're looking at integrating as well.
That's good.
Yeah, pretty much the whole point is that because it's community driven, it should be reflective of what the community is looking for. And so that's how it gets better, by people saying, we want this or we want that, as opposed to waiting for, your minister or whatever to figure it out on their own.
Absolutely. Great. Just as you were talking, it occurred to me to ask you, is there anything you can share about making media accessible, from the radio doc to the app to the video?
Yeah.
Not that you have to be an expert, but things you've learned along the way.
Yeah, and I definitely wasn't. And sometimes I still feel like when people ask me to go and speak on a panel, I'm like, I'm not an expert. I can tell you my own story, but I can't be, the be-all, end-all. So when it comes to accessible technology, that was something I knew nothing about. I'd never built an app, and I definitely didn't even understand what went into building an accessible app. So I didn't know how to code, so then I definitely didn't know how to code accessibly. And so I learned a lot, and there's actually, I think my number one resource was from a group of developers in the city. They run their own meetups called Accessibility TO, or anyway, they go by A11YTO on Twitter, as in accessibility truncated, because there's 11 letters in between, which is weird. But anyway, they are passionate developers who focus on accessibility. And I knew nothing about their language, so I went to their meetups just to listen to them talk. And from going to a couple, I learned a lot about what I needed to keep in mind and things being screen reader friendly and how to create buttons and targets and proper captions and tags. And yeah, it's a huge world out there when it comes to accessible tech. And I think one of the challenges is that people don't know that. So the same way that in the physical world we need to create access, if you want to build a business or you just start building a website, if you know how to code and you don't know about accessibility online, it's so much harder to build it in afterwards. So definitely, if you guys are creators and makers, it's not that hard once you learn what's involved. It actually helps you make better products that I've learned.
Any resources from the group? I don't know anything about that. But I know enough to know that I don't know.
Good start.
But also, I guess it's very important of user input, you know, so that if you're building a website, you have a group of people test it out. And I know at Tangled, we were really excited about the idea of having audio description of all the artwork, so you could go in the gallery and listen to a headset and have the work be described to you if you were blind or visually impaired. Do you remember this? And someone came, I'm talking to Megan who works at Tangled, but someone came in who was blind and we were like, here you go. And she was like, I'm in an art gallery. I don't want to be isolated by a headset and be cut off from everyone chatting. I'd much rather you take me around and show me the work, which is obviously a very low-tech version of what we had created. And that input wasn't to say that we should just get rid of the audio description. Of course not. Some people love it. But it was the user input allowed us to think about I guess the answer would always be more solutions are better because it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Even people sharing the same impairment, their preferences are going to be different. And I think that's something I wanted to ask you. Of course, creating accessibility through media and creating accessible media isn't just about giving people access to the barest minimum. And you talk about this as sort of creating a culture of inclusion, which is about sort of opening up to what people have to offer and acknowledging that when everyone's included, the culture becomes richer and more diverse and more interesting. Do you want to talk at all about that?
I feel like you just summed it up so
well.
No. What you said. So it's, for me, Access Now, it's functional in that it does its job, but it does a lot more in terms of the conversations that it creates. And I think one of my favorite conversations is just talking about, I don't want to spend my whole life, researching accessibility. And as much as I am, an accessibility girl now, which is quite ironic if you know me personally, I kind of just, want to go do things that I like. I'm not just wanting to just talk about my wheelchair and the barriers around me all day long. That's just so dreadfully boring. And that's my job. No, I love my job. And so, it creates a conversation in which you talk about how can we just remove those barriers so that people with or without disabilities can actually just go do what they want. And that is apparently rocket science. That's very simple thought that people with disabilities have ambitions and goals and dreams and want to do things. To me, it's if I go out, I should not be congratulated for going down the street. This is not my big day. This is just me living. And so if you start to realize, every single time I go out, wow, things are not that easy, people start to get that from just a human, that makes no sense. We need to fix this. And so rather than it being this, let's help the needy, which is so passé and I'm so over it and I'm not needy, I'm a little needy, but not for those reasons. You know, it's about like, let's just let people live. Wow, I just got so preachy. But like, so I don't know if this sounds like a very excellent segue. Did you set this up for the Vice piece?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so you want me to set it up, or do you want to set it up? Okay. So that's funny. So a lot of the Access Now as a platform is about engaging with media and creating mainstream conversations that shift that perspective, that shift the concept of like people with disabilities as like being these little, you know, needy, unfortunate souls, to being people who can be radical and do things that are excited and just like, you know, you'll hear in the video, different perspectives. And that conversation, hopefully the idea is to work with media to shift that perspective, you know, so that people don't come up to someone with a disability and freak out and shy their kid away, or, you know, are so uncomfortable to the point that, you know, like we're not people or something. You know, like, let's just start to humanize everything that we're not comfortable yet. And that, like, is a starting point. So we're not there yet, but I want to create conversations that kind of shift the perspective that people with disabilities are just like everybody else. And there are needs for every person, not just people with disabilities, to gain access. And so if we can create access for everyone, then we can all just go out and do things. Okay, you can play it now. So this is a piece by Vice that we did not too long ago.
funny.
I'm not apologizing.
I think there was something so interesting about the tone that you're setting, because when we think about accessibility and we read the AODA website, I mean, it seems really convoluted and laborious and complicated. There's standards that you have to, how wide is the door, all of this stuff. But to make an app that's so simple that anyone can use it, I think more than creating a resource, I think it sets the tone of this is all of our responsibility, and it's pretty easy to map this out. And like someone said in the video, everyone has an internal map of where to go, even if your access need is, a quiet space with dim lighting, you would know that, and to be able to put it on this map in this relatively simple way, I think demystifies a lot of the complexities of accessibility. So it's so great. So we should all have that on our phone by now. So what's the app called? Access Now.
Yes, it's Access Now.
That's the app. So by the end of the class. Okay, so now we wanted to have a bit of a workshop time with everyone. So what were we thinking? Sorry. So we were thinking that we could divide up in small groups of 2 or 3 or what have you, and think about this question based on what Maayan has been telling us so far. So the question is, what are some of the strategies for using media to map safe, accessible, invisible, or forgotten community spaces? And we'll come back to a larger group to discuss. So I think, along with everything that Maayan has been telling us, we might also think about maybe mapping safe crip accessible spaces. But I also know there's websites like the Marvelous Ground website, which is a project that's sort of similar to what you're doing. But it's mapping queer color spaces in the city. So if that's a community that you're involved in, and the website sort of thinks about how we're rerouting and finding safety in potentially in inhospitable cities. So maybe think about your own life and what you need to feel safe, and but also be thinking about how that safety and that sort of invitational feeling can be extended beyond, of course, what you yourself need, and to imagine going out with classmates and needing to find a space that works for everyone. So I guess I just convoluted the question, but maybe just go back to what we wrote and talk about that. Any questions about that? What time are we at? Maybe we'll take about 15 minutes to talk about that, 20 minutes. And then we'll come back and have a large group discussion.